Good afternoon, Faculty of Health Sciences. Welcome to our Transferable Successes webinar. This is our second webinar in the faculty. This is the webinar where it's a space for all of us to share in some of the wonderful work that we've all been doing around transformation, the interventions that have worked for us, interventions that have not worked for us. And this is a space where we hope that we can share our thoughts and our views and be quite candid and frank with one another. We've asked the presenters of these webinars to not only focus on the successes, but to really share some of the growing pains of reaching those successes and some of the things that, quite frankly, they just have not been able to resolve for all of us as a community to discuss and to share. So thank you very much to Department of Medicine that have taken on this space today. And we welcome Professor Ketan Deda, who is the representative from the Department of Medicine, who is going to join us and do this presentation. We also note apologies from Professor Ndusi, who is the head of Department of Medicine, who is unfortunately not able to join us today. But has contributed meaningfully to the presentation that Professor Deda is going to give to us. After Professor Deda speaks, the Dean will make a few comments because he has to leave. Unfortunately, he was scheduled to speak at the end, but the Dean will speak for a few minutes before he goes to his next engagement at 12:30. And then Professor Mark Hendricks will then take over the discussion and facilitate the discussion, and then we will end. Thank you very much. Professor Deda, over to you.
Yeah, thanks Tracy, for that very kind introduction, and thanks for the invitation to present our experiences on behalf of the Department of Medicine. I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of what this talk is about to extensively describe the demographics of the department, and it's not an extensive list or outline of everything we did, but just to highlight a few important interventions. Now I'm going to try and advance my slides. There we go. So to give you a brief overview, I'll introduce you to the team at the Department of Medicine. And the way we've structured this talk is to really highlight three specific challenges. As I said, we could spend several hours talking about so many different issues. And the three challenges that I've selected, and in each case, I will outline the challenge and how we tackle them. And essentially, those three are the challenges of attracting and retaining junior doctors, funding the Department of Medicine transformation model. I think it was Zig Ziglar who said, money is not everything, but it ranks up there with oxygen, and it's very hard to implement anything without dedicated funding. So I'll talk a little bit about that challenge and how we have tried to address or assuage that concern. And then finally, the third challenge was supporting the development of academic clinicians, translational scientists, and clinician scientists. So at the outset, I want to acknowledge a very big team. This presentation, although it's being done by me, is really on behalf of the Department of Medicine and a very large team of people. I will not extensively go through the list and everybody here, so apologies if I don't acknowledge you by name in person. Of course, this is on behalf of Professor Ntuzi, the head of department, Professor Mayozi, one of my mentors, and in fact the reason that I got to UCT, and this is just to make the point that I'm not only referring to work that the Transformation Committee did and was established about 3 years ago. The work predated that, and there is an immense amount of capacity development that occurred prior to the current guard, and also to acknowledge Debbie Morn and Simtan Dile, the Chief Registrar, other members of the Department of Medicine Executive, the Department of Medicine Transformation Committee, you see them listed here, and the Department of Medicine Research Committee. And again, there are so many other people that I don't mention, but as you can see, it's a whole team of people. So the first challenge is really about attracting and retaining junior staff. And the big problem, as many of you will know, I'm not going to spend too much of time on this slide, is that there is an impression that UCT is a confrontational and diversity unfriendly environment. And many questions have been asked about whether there are reputational issues contributing to the failure to attract candidates from a limited national pool. And indeed, as outlined in this paper by Leslie London and colleagues, in one of the findings in the specific paper was that a quarter of respondents at the time the study was done reported knowledge of a friend who decided against studying at UCT for reasons which included anticipated racial discrimination. There are also, I'm just going to highlight one or two other things that I think are important with regard to attracting staff and retaining them. The one is the lack of visibility of adverts for clinical posts and other posts. There's a system that's called the block advert system, for those who are not familiar with it. These are rolling ads in a couple of newspapers. And how will we ever attract candidates if these adverts are not visible? And it largely left up to the head of department and divisions to circulate adverts. And there is great concern that there's not visibility of these adverts both throughout the province and nationally. There are also delays in advertising and filling posts, contributing to frustration and lack of will. And here I'm talking about the EE rep support system and lack of funded posts to support that process. And I think this is not a new issue. This issue has been discussed and been raised a number of times. So what have we done in the Department of Medicine? Well, the first thing we've done to create an attractive and supportive environment is to tell you a little bit about the Registrar Leadership and Resilience Program. And essentially, this is a program which started several years ago and involves improving the working environment through restructure of ward and clinical workflows, staffing rotas, creating an international registrar portfolio, a medical officer portfolio, welcome packs, there's a wellness committee, there are team building activities, which is part of the package. And I'll show you a slide just now that will describe this in more detail. There's consultant mentorship that is built into it. There are specific support workshops, protected research and teaching time. So it's a whole package of things. And this was the structured team and governance structure that drove this program. I'm just showing you this exemplar slide from 2018. And then here you can see the committee in 2020. So this is not something that was a once-off that was started. It is a living program that strengthens from year to year. And here you can see the various different committee members. There's also an international registrar committee that was established. And important to note, I'm not going to go through the slide in detail, but at one point in August 2018, about 54% of the registrar body had been allocated to provide emergency cover, suggesting that there was a very high rate of leave for mental health issues and burnout. And this was one of the key reasons that this program was established. Now, I'm just going to get through all the animations of this slide. And again, I'm not going to go through this slide in great detail, but this is just an overview of this resilience program, showing you the different components and the different facets of the program. And maybe I can, I think this is being recorded and I'm happy to circulate this talk. So maybe we can go through some of those details later on. In addition to this program, the Department of Medicine Transformation Committee has been working on a number of initiatives that have been rolled out, and I'll give you some exemplars. One was co-funding the FCP Part 2 training program in terms of food, transport, thank you cards, and so forth. There were also specific improvements that were made to the registrar room, for example, and I think I'll show you a picture of that just now. The Department of Medicine Transformation Committee also advertises grants. So these are grants of between 20 and 40,000 Rand. And there are 2 cycles now where these grants have been advertised. And this is specifically to support nascent transformation candidates, and would cover things like research startup or research completion, to attend a specific conference that is very important. And of course, we have an application form, a short application form, and one has to submit a motivation. And our last grant went to Dr. Pendila Gina, who completed a full-time PhD, bench-based PhD. She's a specialist physician, and she completed this PhD in the Department of Medicine. We also plan to shortly advertise an innovation grant, and this grant would be similarly in the region of about 20,000 Rand. And this is to specifically drive ideas from from a basic to demonstrate basic proof of concept. So really a separate grant, but focusing more on innovation. We also have in place a mentorship program, and the way this works is that members of the Transformation Committee take part in this program and give their time to mentor specific candidates, and this is arranged through the Chief Registrar. We also have had running a lab training induction program for clinicians interested in research, and that was spearheaded by Malika Davids. And here you can see a picture on the right-hand side of the FCP Part 2 training program, and some very elated graduates. And this is just to show you what, an example of what we've done in terms of supporting the junior doctors, in this case, the infrastructure that we supported in the registrar room. And this may seem like very simple and small things that we've done, but in fact had a big impact on our registrars, and also a big, also related to safety issues, because prior to that there were concerns about registrars traveling home late at night, and so now they have a very comfortable and well-equipped room. Couple of other things that the Transformation Committee is involved in. One is conducting a landscape survey to understand push factors that are mitigating applications. The Transformation Committee at the moment, in fact, we had our meeting yesterday, and we are reviewing the advertising policy and the reach of these adverts, particularly for consultants and senior registrars. The challenge, as I outlined to you, is that often these adverts are not visible to many prospective applicants, and you cannot apply for what you can't see, right? So, in fact, we had a discussion with Mark yesterday, and we are in the process of co-opting the Department of Pediatric Policy. And we are also considering right now co-opting someone from the provincial HR side to interact with our Transformation Committee so that we can finalize this policy and actually effect it. The Transformation Committee will also be interacting with the heads of divisions to derive a transformation plan for each division. I now want to move on to challenge 2, which is the funding aspect. And the problem is really the need TEC was formed in the founding discussions. One of the principles that was strongly promoted was that the TEC would have a dedicated budget. And the question is, where should that money come from? In terms of what we've done so far, we have an annual dedicated funding from the Department of Medicine that flows into a separate funding account that is run by the TEC. There are ad hoc contributions have been made by some university accredited units. And then some of a very small amount of the subsidies, don't quote me on this figure, I don't really exactly know what that number is, but there's a very small amount of the subsidies that flow back to the departments. And some of this flows to the Transformation Committee. And then in our department, we've had one instance where patent fees, which are part of these fees for patents that are owned by UCT, accrues back to the department and to specific researchers. And it's the departmental component that we've now diverted to the Transformation Committee funds. Right, so that's essentially a summary of what we've done on the funding side and how we've dealt with that. Then there's the issue of the development of clinician scientists, which I've selected as the third challenge that I wanted to discuss. And I'm not going to go through this slide in detail, but as you know, there's a huge problem. There's a dearth of clinicians with PhDs and translational scientists. And there's a number of major or unmet needs. I've listed them here. A lot of them have to do with funding. And there's a very complex and unharmonized, we felt from our Transformation Committee side, local and national regulatory environment. It's a very complex environment, and I'm in no way suggesting that we shouldn't have regulatory bodies. We have to have regulations, but it's quite bewildering for a nascent candidate starting research to deal with all this, and we need to talk about how to put in support structures to help a nascent candidates to navigate this complex environment. And the other issue is that, you know, in each division, there are people really struggling to do clinical research and PhDs. And the big issue, and we have had some discussions already, Mark and I, about this. One of the aspects that have been identified over the last decade, and as we've tried to address this a number of times, but it's never gotten anywhere, is that the research subsidies, and I'm referring to the research subsidies from the published manuscripts and training of PhD students, don't return back to the researchers. So it's very, very difficult to sustain anything. In any event, it's so difficult to start something up, and then when you built up some steam to sustain it is very difficult. And I know at many other universities, I'm not going to name each university, but up to 90% of those funds actually come back to the department or the research units. And I know of one research unit at another university, they publish a lot of papers. So does the Center for Lung Infection and Immunity in the Division of Pulmonology, and their subsidy that comes back to them amounts to over R1 million a year. So it's quite substantial. So I think that really is summarizing the problem. What are some of the things that we've done as the Department of Medicine Transformation Committee, besides promoting certain limited PhD funding scholarships that are out there? I already told you about the lab induction training program that we offer. I also told you about the mentorship program that we offer. And we have agreed at our recent meeting to drive and to support further the MMeds. And there are specific challenges here. It's about statistical support and particularly writing up the MMed. And I don't know about any of you listening, but I did, wrote my first small piece of clinical research up when I was a senior registrar. This is after I got my FCP. And that first little retrospective report I wrote up was so full of red lines, and it was completely torn up and critiqued by my supervisor, and rightly so. But I, really feel for registrars, and if I had to think back, just writing up that little report, doing that whilst I was training and had to prepare for the FCP exams, it's really a daunting task. And so we are currently looking at specifically sponsoring and funding writing workshops, which is a major unmet need at the moment. What about what we're dreaming about? I mean, we are one transformation committee. There's only a limited amount and a granular amount and a set amount of things that we can achieve with the limited funding we have. But one of our goals is to try as an exemplar to start a model where we can buy out, even if it's 1/8 of a post, to support research time, and this could be on a revolving basis. So a major challenge for transformation candidates who are working as clinicians, they have a very, very heavy workload, and we all encourage them to be doing masters and PhDs, but realistically, to achieve this, one has to have dedicated research time. And how do you do that, and how do you achieve that? And this is not something new that I'm bringing to the table. This has been highlighted in the this ministerial task team report, and I just point out two of the recommendations from that report. One, which highlights financial packages that are needed to address factors that prevent Black students from progressing or academics from progressing, and another one, which is recommendation 8, which is about providing individualized, structured support to complete a doctorate. And the question is, how do we do that? So this is really my last slide. And I want to not go through all these points, but it's an editorial, and perhaps you can look it up and read it up. And it was published in The Lancet last year, and it espouses some of the principles that our transformation committee tries to follow. And just to I'm not going to go through them now. I think just to give us more time for discussion, but just to maybe highlight the last point here is that equity efforts require strong, high level and sustained financial investment. So I think I'll stop there. I thank you for your attention, and of course, happy to take any questions and to join the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And I thought that was an excellent presentation, looking at, let me make sure that I'm on visual and everybody's hearing me. I just want to say thank you very much for that comprehensive presentation. I think that Esther 2 article that you've raised at the end, that editorial really does present us with stuff to chew on, because I think it raises fundamental issues in terms of how we deal with transformation issues across the board. I'm really pleased to see the intentional management and support of registrars in the system. I think that that's an important thing. And it begins to speak into the conversations we've started with registrars across the system, just to kind of hear from them their attitudes regarding their training and their experiences on the platform. So thank you very much for that. I just want to make a point, though, that these conversations are really for us as a faculty to begin to reflect on the things that we're doing, reflect a little bit on the things that are working, and perhaps to then emphasize the areas where we need to focus a little bit. The question of subsidy, Kirsten, I think the models across the country are very variable. I think part of what I'm trying to do from the Office of the Dean now is to try and understand what the landscape is regarding the money that's available in the faculty, because I do think we need to be more intentional about that, because my sense is that there may be resources in the system which, if we bring them together and then harmonize everybody's contribution, we may be able to do a lot more. But I do want to commend the work that you're doing in the department, and we look forward to talking through these things again. Colleagues, thank you very much.
Thanks, Lionel.
Thank you very much, Lionel, and thank you for making the time to come and make these comments. I'd like to hand over to Mark to facilitate the discussion. Mark? Oh, there you are. We can't hear you though, Mark.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi there. Sorry about that. So thank you to everybody. Firstly to Tracy for foregrounding this important space as one of the outputs from the framework document that we launched in June as a way to try and capture the important work that's being done across the faculty and hopefully to be able to learn from others and to implement things in our own space, especially in spaces where the move to transform may have been slower than in other silos of the university and of the faculty. And thank you particularly to Kirtan for coming and sharing the experiences of medicine, which, as I said to him yesterday when I joined their TC meeting, probably one of the departments who have done the most work in terms of the portfolios that the university specifically looks at to measure transformation. So thank you to his committee and for people, particularly like Bongani, who really were forerunners of this kind of work. I just want to focus on one thing before I open the floor to questions. I have some questions of my own, but I see the comments in the box, so we'll attend to those. There are about 40 of us in the room, so I'm expecting people to interact. But I want to just highlight something that jumps out for me, and it's on this last slide, which is useful considering that it's still up, and that word is ownership. And I want to emphasize the importance of that word in this space, because without ownership, nothing can get done. I said to Kirtan and to the committee yesterday that any kind of transformation intervention requires a champion, somebody who is passionate, someone who is prepared to give up time and to put in extra energy to realize a change in a space, and that takes an enormous amount of work. So without that, all the other issues I think are secondary, including funding. So that's just by way of opening. I wanted to just quickly go to the chat box, and I see there is a comment from Dr. Begg, who speaks to the issue of biostatistics support and also writing lab support. And I wonder, Kieran, if you're able, if you wanted to just give a little bit of detail about that, considering your previous position at Stellenbosch University.
Mark, there's a note that Karen has had to leave to another meeting, so I'm not sure if she's still on the call. Sorry about that.
All right. Well, I have a few questions, Kirtan. I was interested to look at your slide where you spoke about entry and exit interviews. And I ask that because one of the particular issues that I think all departments struggle with are why, in particular, Black students do not stay on to do their postgraduate work in this faculty. Either undergraduates who just left and are looking to come back to do registrar time, or those who have completed registrar time and then are are looking to maybe move beyond that into subspecialist fields and beyond. And I was wondering if anything in particular had come, in particular from the exit interview process, to help you as a department in medicine understand what those particular push and pull factors were in terms of retention.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. If I can quickly comment on Dr. Begg's comment about the biostatistical support, and she highlighted the Stellenbosch model, and I would strongly support that. If you look at the amount of income that's brought in by the Faculty of Health Sciences, you know, biostatistical support, dedicated biostatistical support for the faculty, let alone for you know, registrars and MMeds, has been a major issue, and specifically for the MMeds and for you know, trainees, postdocs, and so forth, at all levels. I would strongly support an initiative where we explore you know, the Stellenbosch model further, and we have dedicated biostatistical support. With regard to the exit interviews for registrars, I wonder if Debbie Morn is on, or Simtandile, are you on the call? Either of you on the call? I can't see the list of participants. Debbie or Simtandile, are you guys on the call? No, I don't think so. So Mark, I think neither is Prof. Ntuzi. He sent his apologies, but I think that, you know, those would be the people that would be best qualified to comment and be familiar about these push factors that we got in a granular sense from our registrars. I don't have, I recently haven't reviewed that in detail, so I'm unable to give you specific factors, you know, from the exit interviews. But what I could do is to put that together and to send it across to you, and maybe we can distribute to the group.
Thank you. That'll be great. I wanted to then ask a question about funding. So you spoke quite a lot.
Mark, I'm saying there's a note here that Simtandile would like to make a comment on this.
Oh, fantastic. Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, have I been unmuted now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great, thank you. In terms of the welcome and exit interviews, with discussions with the registrar body as well as Ntobeko, we were concerned that perhaps the registrars were not feeling valued, and people would complete their training, but then a lot of individuals wouldn't know the avenues that they would have to go through to proceed and perhaps join a fellow program or go into research. So the basis of this was to try and establish a system where there are regular interviews just before the registrar time is finished, so that a path can be created somewhat for our registrars. I wouldn't join those meetings. Those would be held by Prof. Ntuzi with the registrar, and this would actually assist in terms of junior consultant posts, connecting registrars with different departments, and assist with funding should they need it. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Simtandile. That's great. So that sounds like a focus on operational issues, right, around access and around pathways and funding. It would be interesting to know if there were other factors, you know, things related to the institutional climate, for example, that affected people's choices of whether to stay or not. But I suppose we may not get an easy answer to that question today. But thank you for that input. I see there's a question from Val. And the question relates to what success you've had in raising new funding for transformation-related activities, especially for personal support for transformation candidates, rather than a reallocation from other internal sources.
Yeah, thanks, Val. That's a very important question. I would say we've had some success in terms of securing fellowships, and I can name a few. We've had a few candidates in the Department of Medicine that have been part of the Health Scholars Program for medical graduates, though there was a major problem identified, which we've taken up with the MRC, and they're looking into it at the moment, in that the health scholars, which were supposed to be paid at a clinical rate, were actually not being paid at that rate. So that was a major issue that we identified. The other fellowships that candidates successfully secured were the EDCTP fellowships, that's the second one. And then there were also discovery fellowships. Then there are also training fellowships, for example, from Life Health and Mediclinic and so forth, but that's more for training of senior registrars. Now, the big problem that we encountered here is, whilst you have the support for the salary component of the candidate, there is no consumable support. So now you've got to apply for a different grant, or you have to find support for them internally from research units. So that's a major challenge. Another major challenge we see in the Department of Medicine is that we have a number of clinicians and also translational scientists who've sort of reached a certain level, be it at postdoc level or junior research fellow level. And you know, they have other duties. So they have clinical duties, they have lab duties, and so forth. And the question is, how do we buy out time for them in order to do higher degrees, and for transformation candidates, in other words, you know, to have them complete PhDs. It's a nice thing to set as a goal, but realistically to actually accomplish this is extremely challenging. Feeding into that is the whole issue of biostatistical support. And then what about support for structures and administrative support? You know, it's a very complex regulatory environment now to negotiate. So even if you wanted to do, you know, a small clinical study or a translational study, there's quite a complex regulatory framework that you have to negotiate. And more, it's becoming more and more difficult for people to successfully complete even projects of limited size. And the way around this, what we've had to do in our department is for them to link up with accredited and larger units. But it is a major challenge. And the question is, how do we have support structures in place and people in place to support these candidates so that they can you know, negotiate these hurdles? So I think there are many layers to this funding thing, but this is just some of the aspects and the challenges we've encountered. I don't know if that addresses your question, Val.
Thanks, Ketan. The next question comes from Colette Endara, and he asks, could you comment on how you have managed the issue of broad participation, not just having EE profile staff being the ones who push and give up their time to be active in the transformation space? Yes,
thanks, Colette. That's a very important point. I think that's really boils down to the governance structure in one's department. And I showed you from the outset that we have, you know, a broad-based governance structure. There's the governance structure within the Department of Medicine. There's the Department of Medicine Research Committee. We have a Transformation Committee. And then we also have a representation of the Chief Registrar. We have an International Registrar Committee. And basically, without going into too much of detail, we have a cascading governance structure. And in fact, at our meeting yesterday, Mark, after you left, one of the aspects that we recognized was the deficiency was representation of very specific groups. For example, medical officers and junior consultants was one of the groups that we identified that didn't have adequate representation. So this is an evolving thing, and one has to start somewhere. But as time evolves and the transformation initiatives strengthen, one identifies that there are weaknesses in certain areas and lack of representation. And so we found that from the time we started, our transformation committee is actually growing in size, right? We initially started only with about 4 individuals, then it went to 6, and I think now we're going to be approaching about 8 or 9 people. So I would, in a nutshell, say that it's important to have a good governance structure that cascades and to have representations from all parts of your division or department, so that you can not only get their views and opinions, but also that the initiatives that are implemented can reach them. Thank you.
Thanks, Kirtan. That's an important question. I think to speak to that broadly as well, I think broad participation is also built on the functional success of any transformation committee. And it's certainly been our experience in pediatrics as well, that as time has gone forward and we've been lucky to get more funding and to be able to do more and to change more, that has attracted people who traditionally may have been in the background, kind of waiting in the wings to see whether the transformation project was going to work at all before they decided to throw their hat in the ring and become involved. So I think you also become a product of your success. And if you can show people that you are committed and that change, in fact, is happening, albeit that it may be incremental in some places, that you start to generate interest amongst groups of people who may previously have felt either isolated or fairly cynical about the transformation project. And as you go forward in time, it seems to be easier to pull those people in and to get them involved. And by, I think, secondary intention, then you start pulling in people from more and more diverse backgrounds as people start to be have faith in what you're doing, and also to feel safe themselves to come forward and to do transformational work, which often comes at personal cost for many people. So thanks, Kirtan. That's a useful input. The next question is from Sabelo Khadebe, and he asks, what do you think the Department of Medicine has done right that other departments can learn from, specifically on staff demographics?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I specifically left out, demographics, but I'll answer that question in a very broad-based way. I mean, my whole talk was about, partly to answer that question, and I picked 3 very specific challenges and tried to give you an idea of what we did there. But I think the answer to your question is really something that's not happened over a year or 2, but I think that's happened over the last decade or maybe 2 decades. And there've been a whole bunch of people, and I made that point at the outset, that have laid the foundational structure. Prof. Mayosi was the former head of the Department of Medicine, and he did an extensive amount of work in different facets of the department. There was the registrar component, there was the laboratory component, there was the scientists, and I see Zenda has put in something about nurses, and this is important to include the entire team. So without going into too much of granular detail, the demographics issue is very, very complex, and maybe Mark can make a few comments. I've tried to focus on things that we can practically address. One of the things that I really tried to emphasize was the issue of visibility of adverts. And Mark, you and I discussed this yesterday. And this is a very specific challenge, and your question asks about what others can learn. And what we found is that often, you know, if there was a new consultant post or there was a senior registrar post, what would happen is that this would be covered by this rolling block ad, right? And it would really be up to the head of division to kind of, you know, WhatsApp and email on their own people that they knew. But this should not be the case, right? There should be a transparent, open, comprehensive way. I mean, we've got social media now, right? And we discussed this in our transformation committee meeting yesterday. We've got LinkedIn. We've got Facebook pages, and I mean, you know now when something happens how quickly information travels. Now, why can't we achieve that with our adverts? And we've had a number of instances. I've had people come to me to say, you know, I wanted to apply for that post. I didn't even know this consultant post was advertised in a particular division. Now, how are we going to attract candidates? You know, let's face it, there's a limited pool. It's a national pool. And this not only applies to clinician posts, this applies to senior scientific posts and so forth. You know, how are we going to attract these people to our university and to our institutions if they cannot see the adverts, right? So I think this is just one granular example that I want to unpack here in terms of answering your question. And maybe Mark wants to comment more on that.
Yeah. So I think the issue of demographics is and isn't an easy issue. I think in terms of, I think one of the things that most departments will not have a clear sense of, if you had to ask them, would be a sense of how they look like and what they want to look like in 2 or 5 years' time. And so that's critical, because unless you have a very clear picture of where you're going, you really have no way to map out the kinds of changes you want to make in terms of your demographic, whether that relates to race or gender or disability, for example. So that's the first thing. And then once you have that, you actually have to set targets against that to be able to move in a way that when you do an M&E in your, at whatever your interval is going to be, or 2 years, you can see to what extent you've shifted or not. So that I think is critical, that's worked out and engaged with in an active way. And that should be led by a head of department in conjunction with a transformation chair and the committee, and should be an ethos of any of the departments, certainly in 2020. I think one of the other issues, and it speaks to the previous issue of, you know, how we attract and retain people. I think part of what happens in terms of support and mentorship is that we start too late. And I think one of the things that we need to start thinking about and doing, and something that I certainly more actively do now, is to identify students in the undergraduate space at 5th and 6th year level who have a penchant for a particular area. So if it's pediatrics or medicine, makes no difference. And to provide some kind of mentorship. There is actually a final year mentorship program in the faculty. Most of the undergraduate students don't know about it, and I'm sure probably 50% of the consultants in the faculty don't know about it either. But it's available. And, you know, that's a way to identify people with potential, to get them into a mentorship program, and then to follow them post-graduation to bring them back into the postgraduate space. And that's, again, a fair amount of work and a fair commitment. But unless you commit to do that, what will happen is that once those graduates leave, you will lose them. If there's not continued interest to say, hi, how are you doing? How are things going? What are your benchmark activities? Are you ready to come back and do your Z83, etc.? So it's a commitment to a process, I think, over time. Anyway, I'm talking too much. I'll move on to the next question. So the next question is from Naidu, and he asks, you had raised some issues around HR challenges in earlier slides. Have these been raised with your HRBP before?
Sorry, Mark, just repeat the question.
So Nave, speaking about the HR challenges to which you referred in some of the previous slides, and he's asking whether those HR challenges have been raised with human resources previously.
Yes, so it's been raised. Yes, I understand. Sorry, there was a break in the transmission. To answer the question, they have not been raised yet in a systematic way. They have been raised in individual cases where I myself have expressed concern about lack of visibility of specific adverts, and you know, I unpacked this whole block advert thing. But no, the answer is we have not yet taken this up in a systematic way, in the sense of a formal, you know, a formal sort of complaint or raising the issue formally with the provincial HR. However, there are moves afoot. So, for example, Mark, I mentioned this early on. In fact, will be co-opting the Department of Pediatrics has a policy on this. We want to co-opt this into the Department of Medicine, and we are planning to engage very shortly with Bhavna and her team on this particular issue. And Mark, we had a long chat about this yesterday. So in essence, it's a work in progress. Thanks.
Yeah. So I'm conscious of time, and before we reach the hour, I just want to take a few more questions. So Zenda asks specifically about nursing staff, and she says, have nursing staff and other support staff been included in transformation initiatives? And by other support staff, I'm guessing that she's referring to the past staff.
Yes, that's a very good point. This has happened to some extent in our department, but not as much as we would have liked it to happen. We have had nurses, for example, that have been enrolled in postgraduate studies. In fact, I myself have been the primary supervisor of 2 nurses that have completed PhDs. So that's one sort of facet of it, is postgraduate training. And there are various other components, and maybe Simtandile can talk to this, and integration of other staff into, for example, the resilience program. So that would be another dimension. So I don't know if Sim, are you on the call? Can you maybe comment?
Yes, I think you can hear me now. Thanks for unmuting. In terms of having it formally structured, we haven't had a system that encompasses everyone. Surely our medical officers and registrars, but from the nursing staff and other staff members in the department, we haven't really had a system that encompasses everyone. With this year's change in our structure in the medicine department, we now have a ward-based system. So each clinician works in a specific ward. So you will have your nurses in one ward, your registrars, your consultants. So in this system, you have a team because you are not moving around between different wards. So the only thing that I can say perhaps that has encompassed the other staff members is how the ward-based system has resulted in teams that include all level of staff in terms of doctors, as well as our nursing staff and other staff in the department, but nothing structurally. Thanks.
Thanks very much. I think we probably have time for one more question. And sorry, but my scroller keeps on jumping around. But I'm going to take Sipho Dlamini's question. So Professor Dlamini asks about the implementation of key performance indicators, so KPIs for heads of departments or heads of divisions, as a way to ensure the embedding of transformation in the faculty. His final comment really relates to how to do this is what the faculty needs to develop guidance and policy on. And so perhaps as a closing salvo, if Tracy, if you're still there. So just to speak to that specific issue, when I started on the transformation committee, that was something that was much talked about, but not done. And over the time, from Carolyn Williamson's tenureship and now into the new deanery space, in fact, that has now been added into the KPIs for HODs and HODivs. So that is now part of the envelope when we sit in selection committees for those new posts. But Tracy, perhaps a final comment from you. We're a minute before the hour.
No, absolutely, as you say, Mark, and I think this is something that on the joint space in particular, that the Dean and the CEO of GSH, Dr. Bhavna Patel, are actively in conversation about, because I think that is probably, this is complex, but when you add on the layer of the joint space, I think it becomes even more complex. And it is indeed something where we want to hold people accountable for, because in fact, it is one of the key pillars of our transformation framework, which is around ensuring accountability. So that's that. And also, just more broadly, colleagues might be aware that as part of this whole package of transformation interventions that we are implementing as a faculty together with the TEC, one of the other ones is for us to do a survey, an annual transformation survey, where we actually ask about what people's views. I mean, I think the instrument of a performance agreement is one, but there is also whether or not actually things are changing on the ground and people are feeling that their leaders are being held accountable. So that's something also that we are asking people's views and opinions on that also in the survey. So that will also be another piece of information that will add to the nuance of understanding how we are doing with accountability. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Tracy. So, colleagues, it's 1 o'clock, and I think we've come to the end of our hour. And so I'd like to thank everybody for your very brisk participation in this webinar. Fantastic. It made my life very easy. So thank you for wonderful questions. I'm sorry that we didn't get to all the questions and comments, but we will have these recorded, and so we can keep them for posterity and go back to them. And just again to thank Professor Dearda for a great presentation. Thank you very, very much. Over to you, Tracy.
No, thank you very much, colleagues, and thank you very much, Professor Dearda, for the time and actually really igniting such interesting conversation, and Mark also for facilitating the great discussion and participants. And I think that just goes to show that all of us are really grappling with this, and there's not much to talk about. And so we're really looking forward to continuing this series of webinars in the new year. And also we're working with communications on having these webinars on our website, because we do understand that colleagues may not have time to attend. And so we're going to create a tab where all these webinars will be on there with the recording, so that people can also look at them even when they want to refer to them. But thank you very much, colleagues, and have a good afternoon. Goodbye. Oh, by the way, and also want to thank Goodman Sibego, who's helped us with the webinar. Thank you very much, Goodman. We wouldn't be able to have this without you. Nobody can see you, but we know you've assisted us to make sure we can do this. Thank you, Goodman, and thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.